All right, let's dive right into a story that I think you'll find echoes of everywhere in myths from all across the world. It's the story of these incredibly powerful guardians who just abandon their sacred post. And in doing so, they pretty much bring ruin to the very world they were supposed to protect. It's this timeless archetype of the fallen guardian, and we're going to explore it through some really powerful parables, starting with the grand architects of the leaden silks.
But before we get into the weeds, let's just start with the big question that really sits at the heart of this whole thing. Why? Why do we love these stories of betrayal from on high so much? I think the answer tells us a lot about our own anxieties about power, duty, and maybe even the fabric of reality itself. So let's get into it.
Okay, so our story starts in a state of, perfect cosmic order. Picture these sterile, transparent heights. This is the world of the Guardians. And these beings, they're not defined by their raw power, but by their unwavering, completely detached vigilance. Now, the thing that made them special, the crucial quality they all had, was something called the eye of proportion. And this isn't just seeing the future. It's described as a terrible, cold strength, the ability to look right past the chaos of the now and see the always. It's a gift of long-term vision that, by its very nature, means you have to be distant. You have to be alone. And we see this character pop up in so many different forms. In the parable of the leaden silks, they're the grand architects watching from a crystal tower. In other stories, they're the bright keepers on a frozen mountain, or the watchers from the Book of Enoch, high above on Mount Hermon. Sometimes it's even just a lone sun-staring eagle. The names change, but the job is always the same. A sacred, lonely watch from a place of absolute chilling clarity.
But this right here is where the story always turns. That very solitude, that clarity that made them so great, it starts to curdle. It becomes a source of resentment. A kind of sickness takes hold. A deep longing for the chaotic, messy, vibrant world down below.
And this slide really lays out the choice they were facing, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the cold, demanding duty of the stars. But on the other, you have the warmth of the hearth, the pull of connection, of being part of the herd, of living in the now. The Guardians start to actually envy the mortals they were supposed to be protecting. They start to see their incredible eye of proportion not as a gift, but as a cage, a blindfold that's keeping them from what the stories call the joy of the pulse. And we're not just talking about simple temptation here. The source material frames this as a kind of spiritual sickness, a deep rejection of their own higher nature. It's a profound act of self-betrayal. This quote from the great king in the parable of the leaden silks, just perfectly captures the devastating trade they made. By choosing the immediate warmth of the hearth, they basically snuffed out the guiding light of the horizon. And that plunged the entire world into a whole new kind of darkness.
And their fall, it wasn't just a personal failing. Oh no. It became an act of cosmic sabotage. They brought their divine knowledge down into the mortal world, and that knowledge, once it was stripped of its proper context and purpose, it immediately became a weapon.
This chart just shows you the pattern so clearly. The Bright Keeper's flame of truth becomes a forge of ambition. In our main story, the architect's blueprints of the infinite are used to create unbreakable weapons and mirrors of vanity. And in the Book of Enoch, it's even more direct. The Watchers, Azazel and Semyaza, literally teach humanity how to make weapons and practice sorcery. Every single time, a gift from the heavens becomes a poison on earth.
And this was their huge fundamental mistake. The sources call it a categorical error. The big takeaway here is that power without perspective just leads to chaos. They really thought they could bring the sun down to the sand, totally forgetting that light, without the wisdom to wield it, doesn't illuminate anything. It just burns.
So, the consequences of this forbidden union, this mix of the celestial and the mortal, well, they weren't just philosophical. They became real. They were tangible. They were monstrous. And boy, were they hungry.
In the parable of the leaden silks, their big mistake gives birth to the hollow lords. These beings are called the Nephilim of ambition. Get this, they're described as having the strength of the architects, but with absolutely none of their restraint. The strength of the heights, but the appetite of the gutter. Chilling.
In another story, the one about the mountain lamps, this unholy mix of celestial light and mortal clay creates the giants of greed. And what's the first thing they do? They immediately start consuming everything in the valley, leaving nothing but chaos behind. And then, of course, you have probably the most famous example of all of this from the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim. Born from the Watchers and human women, these giants basically just tore the world apart with widespread violence and destruction. But the Enochian lore adds this absolutely fascinating and, frankly, terrifying theological twist. When these Nephilim were finally destroyed, their spirits couldn't go back to heaven. They were trapped here, on Earth, becoming what the text calls evil spirits, or demons, that actively plague humanity. So in this version, we get a literal origin story for active, malevolent evil in the world, and it's the direct legacy of the Watcher's original sin.
The final act of this whole tragedy is judgment. But it's not just a simple punishment, it's a kind of poetic justice. It's like a natural cosmic law snapping back into place.
And you can just see the perfect, brutal symmetry of their fate here. The architects who craved those vibrant silks, they end up draped in shrouds of lead. The keepers who taught humans how to forge iron, they get bound in that very iron. In every single story, they are punished not just for their desire, but by it. They are literally and spiritually weighed down by the very dust they chose over the stars. This quote from the parable just perfectly sums up the whole moral of the story. The guardians thought the burden of their duty, the cold of the stars, was too heavy to bear. But in abandoning it, they found a weight that was infinitely more crushing, the gravity of their own choices and the dust they so desperately wanted to be a part of.
Now, if you want to put a philosophical lens on this, you could analyze it as a betrayal of what Nietzsche called the overman, or the higher type. The idea here is that true greatness requires you to endure solitude in order to create new values. And these guardians, they fail that test big time. Instead of creating from the heights, they crave the comfort of the herd below. It's a total regression. It's a failure of what Nietzsche called the will to power, which isn't just about domination, but the drive to grow, create, and overcome yourself.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty unsettling question for our own time. These ancient parables are all warnings about what happens when that detached, long-term vision is traded for short-term comfort and connection. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the burden of that sacred oversight, that cold, difficult, lonely duty, a price for order that we today are no longer willing to pay?